Okay, this is test 3 material. We're going to look at the muscle system. We have 3 different types of muscle: skeletal muscle, cardiac muscle, and smooth muscle. In this section, we're going to focus mostly on the skeletal muscle, which is what, when people say muscle, skeletal muscle is typically what you think of. Okay, cardiac is heart, smooth is all the tubes that are inside of you, which that'll be more of an A&P2 thing when you start looking at cardio, respiratory, digestive system, GI and all that. Those are all smooth muscle and cardiac. Okay, skeletal muscle is also known as striated muscle and voluntary. Voluntary because we can control our skeletal muscle movements on purpose. Smooth muscle and cardiac muscle you do not control on purpose, so that would be considered involuntary. They are striated because when you look at them under a microscope, they have a straight line appearance, or striated. Skeletal muscle is attached to our skeleton, so these do attach to bone, and they do contract with a great amount of force, and you can contract them rapidly. Okay, know this diagram. This is how a muscle overall is put together. We're going to start from the inside and work our way out. I'm going to start with this one actually. It's basically the same picture, just a different animation. So the smallest components here we see are the actin and the myosin. Okay, these are our myofilaments. Actin and myosin, our myofilaments. Okay, and what they do is they're the contractile units. Okay, now let's go back to this slide. Okay, inside of that muscle fiber, you find the actin and myosin. And if you look closely, I'm going to call this a raw spaghetti. Okay, so if you picture raw spaghetti, they're basically long string-looking things that if you grab a handful, you've got a bundle. Okay, so each of these is going to represent a raw spaghetti strand. That's your muscle fiber or the muscle cell. And if you notice, there's a bunch of them put together. Okay, just like you were to grab a handful of these. And all of that is wrapped in the perimysium. Okay, so in this example I'm giving you, your hand would represent the perimysium, and you're holding a bundle of muscle fibers. Okay, so that is the perimysium. Now the muscle fiber itself is wrapped by the endomysium. Okay, so there's your muscle cell wrapped in the endomysium. You put enough of those together, you're going to wrap it in the perimysium. And then if you look carefully here, each of these big circles represents a fascicle. Okay, so in this picture you're physically seeing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 fascicles. You put enough fascicles together and you're going to wrap that in the epimysium. And then that muscle tapers into a tendon and attaches to bone. So be able to label parts or be able to describe this diagram on a test. Okay, this says the same thing that we just covered. Okay, smooth muscle has no striations. When you look at it under a microscope, it does not have striations. It is considered involuntary, which means your autonomic nervous system does the work for you. Subconscious control. If you think about it, when you eat, you don't like sit there and just tell your body, okay, and digest the food and move into the next tube, move into the next chamber. You don't consciously control that. Your involuntary nervous system does it for you. So stomach, urinary bladder, respiratory passageways are examples of where you would find smooth muscle. Smooth muscle is also described as visceral, non-striated, and voluntary. And one of the purpose is to propel food and other substances through these tubes. And it does that through a contraction wave called peristalsis. So here's a cross-section of smooth muscle. So right here we're seeing the circular layer of the smooth muscle, and this outer one right there is the longitudinal layer. Then you have your your mucosal lining in the middle. So this would be the lumen area where the passage of substances would actually occur. And in a way, the circular and the longitudinal contract alternately. So one goes clockwise, the other goes counterclockwise, and this kneading peristaltic contraction wave is what's going to move food through these tubes, move substances from point A to point B. Also, on a clinical note, I do want you to know that just like skeletal muscle, smooth muscle can spasm and get that trigger point type feel just like skeletal muscle can. So with the gastrointestinal and other GI issues, the patients that I have, keep in mind, a lot of people come in with a busted gut. Okay, they have a lot of inflammation because of that. They're eating foods that are pro-inflammatory, which inhibits digestion. They're stressed, which inhibits digestion. A lot of these imbalances with diet, nutrition, stress, all sorts of life imbalances create tension. And the tension creates, we'll just call it knots in the smooth muscle. It decreases the peristaltic wave. It decreases the function of how substances move through these tubes. Gastric juice release, the peristaltic wave, and so forth. So you can get in there manually, and just like you would on skeletal muscle, and do soft tissue work to start to calm down the spasming. So when you're palpating a stomach or over the intestine areas, and you know where to go, and your classic spots that get kinked, like pyloric sphincter, cardiac sphincter area, the ileocecal valve, the hepatic and splenic flexure, the fundus of the stomach, and so on. So there's other areas that just classically get tight and spasmed, preventing movement. I'll get in there and literally manually move them and get things moving again. It's a little uncomfortable, just like if you were to do trigger point on your own skeletal muscle. It's a little uncomfortable to have someone press on that trigger point, but it's also one of those hurt so good type treatments. And certainly a hate me now, love me later moment where it is uncomfortable, but in the end, things start to move again and they feel better. Okay, now that's just the manual therapy. That is not including coaching them and working with them on dietary changes and stress management, anti-inflammatory protocols, detoxing protocols, and so forth. Okay, cardiac muscle is found in the heart. It is striated. See over here is a slide of the straight lines, the striations. There's an animation of it there. Okay, it is involuntary, so the heart is something that contracts on its own. Your autonomic nervous system does it for you. Point of cardiac tissue is to pump blood through your tube system, your arteries and your veins. Okay, skeletal muscle function. It does help produce movement, helps maintain our posture, and stabilize our joints. I have these in asterisks on purpose because later we're going to look at some research on that, and because of the line of work that I do with neuromusculoskeletal problems, a big component to overall health in terms of neuromusculoskeletal health is having a strong core and having muscles that are able to stabilize. If muscles cannot stabilize joints, there's going to be joint dysfunction. So a big part of overall health is exercise, some sort of strength training. Skeletal muscle also helps generate heat. Okay, so one of the reasons why when you get cold, your body will shiver, the movement is designed to try to warm you up. Also, as you can imagine, if you were to start exercising or running, getting your heart rate up, you're going to generate heat, so you'll warm up. So heat is a byproduct of ATP. About 3/4 of our energy does escape as heat. A lot of that's lost through the head and neck area. And then skeletal muscle on average does take up about 40% of our body mass.